In this series, Herd Strategies President Denise Herd connects with industry leaders and community members to discuss the challenges they face within their fields. Join us bi-weekly to learn all about how they see us.
Well, hello there. My name is Denise Herd, and welcome back to another episode of How They See Us. Thank you for joining us, and if you're tuning in for the first time, hello. I'm glad you're here. If you are a returning listener, thank you so much for your continuous support. In today's episode, we are going to have a long overdue conversation about the state of girls and women across the state of Indiana and also specifically within central Indiana. And the information that our guests have discovered paints a very jarring picture. From mental health struggles to alarming rates of sexual violence to the fact that Indiana continues to rank among the worst states for women in terms of health and well-being, it's hard not to feel a sense of urgency when hearing what we're going to have to talk about today. But behind the challenges are strong leaders who are working to change this narrative and share valuable resources throughout our state. Now, two individuals who are working on this effort are Mackenzie Pickrell from the Girl Coalition of Indiana, whose organization recently released the 2024 Indiana Girl Report, and Tamara Winfrey Harris, president of the Women's Fund of Central Indiana, who will soon release Indiana's first ever State of Women in Central Indiana report. These reports highlight issues that Hoosier girls and women face daily and how many of these issues transcend the years and impact women throughout our entire lives. Our goal for this conversation is not just to share the data, but we want to spark some action because the future of Indiana girls and women depends on the support we receive now. So whether you're a policymaker, a community leader, an educator, or just someone who cares deeply about the future of women and girls in our state, we hope this conversation challenges, inspires, and pushes you to be a part of the solution. So before we get started, Tammy and Mackenzie, do you mind introducing yourselves and tell us a little bit about each of you? Mackenzie, I'll start with you since I see you right here to my left.
Hi, Denise. Thanks for having me. I am Mackenzie Pickrell, and I am the Executive Director of Girl Coalition of Indiana. We are a statewide social innovation initiative inspired by the 6 Girl Scout councils that serve the state of Indiana to ensure that all girls have accessible and equitable opportunities to join Girl Scouts. And then we're also focused on research, understanding the state of girls across the state of Indiana, and then advocating on their behalf, because what we know is that all girls deserve the opportunity to live their best lives physically, academically, emotionally, and socially. I've spent about a decade in the girl serving space, but before that, I was a proud participant of several girl serving organizations that really formed me and my desire to be in the girl and women serving space. So I'm excited to have this conversation. Thank you for providing the space for so.
No, thank you so much for being here. And, I won't let the cat out of her bag and have her running around the room, but you have a really great story about what inspired you to work in this space. And so we're going to talk about that because your story will definitely inspire others. So thank you so much for being with us today. And so, Tammy, hey, girl, hey.
Hey. I am Tamara Winfrey Harris, and I'm the president of Women's Fund of Central Indiana. And we convene, invest, and advocate so that everyone who identifies as a woman or girl in Central Indiana has equitable opportunity to reach their full potential, no matter their place, race, or identity. And this is my dream job.
Oh, yeah.
So before I came here for many years, I have been a writer and a speaker and thought leader in the area of the intersection of race and gender. I've been published a lot of places and published 3 books about Black women and Black girls. And so when I got this opportunity, I was like, this has to be a once in a lifetime thing to not just talk about the issues and the joys of being a woman or girl, but to actually do something to help us seize opportunity and mitigate challenges.
You know, I was going to mention the fact that you are an esteemed author whose books can be found on Amazon.com and other places. Where can we find your book?
Wherever books are sold.
Wherever
but
books
I
are
always
sold.
tell people to please support local independent bookstores, because when we don't have them,
that's very true.
We will miss them. So go to Loudmouth, go to Indie Reads.
And if you're not doing anything on October, this weekend, in fact, you visit Lit. The event that's being hosted by Indiana Humanities, which will be great.
Yes.
But, you know, this may air after Lit, but there are a lot of local bookstores in the market. So, I'm sorry, Amazon, I gave you a shout out, and I probably shouldn't have. So, I know they're giving me the thumbs down in here. So, there are a lot of local bookstores in our market. So, yes, please support Buy Local. Buy local. Very, very important, so we can support local businesses in the market.
Bonus points if they're woman-owned.
Nothing, you know, this is about that girl power.
Girl
we have
power,
to support
yes.
girls and women. So thank you both for being here. And as you all can hear, these are two amazing women that are doing amazing work in this space, and they walk the talk. And I think that's what makes the work that they're doing with these two reports that they have been developed so powerful. So let's get to it. In 2024, this year, it marks the second year for your report, Mackenzie, the Indiana Girl Report. And Tammy, your report, The State of Women in Central Indiana, is going to come out in just a matter of days or weeks.
Mid-November.
Mid-November is what we're looking towards. And so, Mackenzie, I would really love for you to share some of your key findings from the 2024 report. And then, you know, Tammy, I'd like for you to kind of chime in there to show like where there's some correlations between the two reports that you two ladies and your organizations have produced.
Yeah. So this is our second report, and I want to take us back a little bit about why. Why did we even start these reports? And it really is because there is a lack of data on the comprehensive well-being of girls in general, but really more so specifically here in Indiana. And so we wanted to have a clear snapshot of where girls were thriving and where they faced some of the greatest challenges. In partnership with Indiana Youth Institute and the 6 Girl Scout Council serving the state of Indiana, we published the first report late last year, and then the 2024 report launched in August. It's been so cool to see how receptive folks have been to the report and the data. And what I personally love about the report is this is our girls, Indiana girls.
Right.
We can't turn an eye anymore to say that doesn't happen here in Indiana.
Right, exactly.
And so it is, the findings are really complicated. There are some girls that are thriving, and there are some girls in crisis. And so what we found is that girls need really 3 things to thrive: positive childhood experiences, healthy relationships and protection and prevention from interpersonal aggression, and access to mental health supports, among many other things. But those are the 3 things that we studied. And so I want to give you some of these data points. So when we look at positive childhood experiences, we do have some good things going for us. In 2022, 9 in 10 female children aged 6 to 17 reported that they had somebody that they trusted in their life, whether that was a mentor, somebody in their neighborhood, somebody in their community. That's great. We do have strong people in our young people's lives. But where it starts to become concerning is 1 in 4 female students in middle school and high school in 7th through 8th grade reported feeling generally unsafe at school. 22% of girls ages, again, in grades 7 through 12, reported that they didn't feel like they could ask their parents for support. And then when we look at positive relationships, we know girls 6 to 17 years of age, 3 in 4 girls experience difficulty making and keeping friends.
That's scary.
That is really
That's
scary.
Very alarming.
Because we know that supports,
Yeah.
not only in adults but in peers, are so essential. When we look at interpersonal aggression, there's increase in bullying. We know that 43% of girls aged 6 to 17 experienced bullying, harassment, or exclusion within the last 12 months.
And that could play hand in hand with that making and keeping friends. also.
Absolutely.
Because, back in the day, I think many of us have friends that we've known since childhood. But, the environment, the culture has changed for kids now, particularly social media.
It's relentless.
Yes. So those types of things are really, they cause fractures within friendships, if
And
you
it
will.
worries me because I think we all know the benefit of just the sister collective.
Right.
You know, the strength
yes.
and what you get. And it makes me sad that there are young women and girls that don't have that and can't maintain that because it's a game changer.
It is. It takes a village, right? It takes a
Right.
village of
Right.
support.
It really does.
We know when it comes to sexual assault, 17% of female high school students reported that they experienced sexual dating violence in the last 12 months. So when we look at classrooms, that's on average 1 or 2 girls in a high school classroom.
That's amazing. That's just, it's chilling,
It
actually.
is.
Yeah.
It's chilling.
Yeah.
It's chilling.
And we're going to talk about mental health in a little bit. But there is a mental health crisis happening in our young people, especially in our young girls. 47% of middle and high school girls experienced feeling depression. So hopelessness or sadness for 2 weeks or longer. 1 in 4 seriously contemplated suicide. And then when we look at how to support our young people in these crises, over 50% of families, parents, guardians reported a struggle to find access to mental health supports for their girl. So not only do we have crisis, but we don't have the tools and resources
To help the adults
support
in
our
their
young
world.
people.
Oh.
And I would add to that, what we've heard is a difficulty finding trauma-informed and culturally competent
Yes.
mental health care.
Yes.
Because for girls of color and for queer girls and all of those who have unique problems that they face, it is really hard for them to find people, and immigrant girls, to find people that can speak to and understand their experience.
Exactly.
And we feel comfortable with people that look like us, love like us, pray like us, live like us. And so, that does present a problem in this space. Are there any other data points that you want to call out? Because, Tammy, I want to get to you to show where this correlation exists, because if we don't address these issues or we don't even understand the brevity or the severity, severity of this issue in our girls, there's no way we can help our women. We can understand what women go through.
Yeah.
No more?
No more.
No more.
I mean, I feel
Okay.
like we laid it down
You did.
real
You
thick,
did.
real
It
fast.
is thick. It is thick. The air in the room is like thick right now. So Tammy, I want to turn to you, and I want you to bring it full circle for us, please.
Here's what we know, and I am so excited. One, because I get to work alongside Mackenzie, but I'm just going to say this is the first time that I know of that we have had such a clear picture of what it means to be a woman and a girl in Indiana. And if you can't name it, then you can't change it, nor can you amplify it.
Right.
And so now we have the data for decision makers to do this. This is the first year for our report that we did along with the Polis Center at IUI. And here's what we found. So we know that the Institute for Women's Policy and Research that keeps report cards for the states has given Indiana a D. And sadly, our report, which digs into like health and well-being and workforce and transportation and housing and violence and a lot of other issues, actually corroborates that. We know that young women are more likely to live in poverty than any other age group. 17% of central Indiana women age 18 to 34 live in poverty. Central Indiana women earn 70 cents on the dollar compared to men, and that pay gap is even wider for women of color. Indiana has the third highest maternal mortality rate of all reporting states. Black women are particularly at risk. In 2019, 53% of Hispanic women and 46% of Black women in Central Indiana lacked access to prenatal care. In Marion County, more than 60% of evictions are filed against women. Single moms who rent pay nearly half of their income to keep a roof over their heads. And in Indiana, more than 42% of women experience violence, sexual violence, or stalking from an intimate partner in their lifetime. So we know there are a lot of Hoosier women who are struggling, and that struggle increases with a lot of intersected factors like race, place, and identity. We can also see that many of the challenges that Mackenzie shared that plague girls in our community can follow them into adulthood. And, you know, if we know that empowered girls become powerful women, if we don't take action, then unsupported girls are going to become vulnerable women with vulnerable families.
You know, you brought up a couple of things. Thank you so much for sharing that data. Were there any other data points you wanted to call out? Because I have so many questions for you both.
Oh my gosh,
This
we'll
is what-
leave it there. 'Cause like there's a lot of data in this report.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a
Yeah.
lot. And so, you know, thank you to the Polis Center over at IU Indianapolis. There is a wonderful resource for information and just data that we can believe and trust and act upon. So we're very fortunate to have organizations like Indiana Youth Institute, IYI, and the Polis Center to give us this valuable information. But you called out something because I want to talk a little bit about two topics that the prenatal care. You know, because we pride ourselves on our numbers trending where this topic is concerned and going down. And infant mortality is actually very high among segments. So it's like we have these numbers, but we shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back because one death caused by infant mortality is one too many. And so that contributes to high hospitalization rates. But then you have high hospitalization rates in your report, Mackenzie, that are reported for girls from what were up to 24. What was the range of girls?
0 to 24.
0 to 24 had high percentages of hospitalizations, but we're seeing strong issues of prenatal care impacting our babies and our women. And so it's interesting how those numbers intersect one another, or that topic intersects one another.
It's important to know we should celebrate progress,
Right.
but to know that better doesn't mean good.
Right, good point.
Yes, so we don't
Right.
stop
Right,
trending in the right direction.
right, right. I want to talk a little bit about numbers, a little bit more, because according to the recent census, Indiana's population right now stands at 50.8% female and 49.2% male. So we're about at parity there. For youth under 18, the numbers are a little reversed. We have 48.7% as female, and we have 51.3% male. Once again, those populations are pretty close in number. But I want to really look at those numbers for women and girls specifically, because I truly believe, and you two are the experts here in this conversation, that there's some foreshadowing here. When we're seeing these population percentages being almost at parity between women and girls, and we're seeing these synergies in these topics, we can see what the future looks like or could look like. Is that fair to say? And the issue that what these issues that are impacting our girls can carry on into adulthood.
I'd love to add some data to that. So in our
Please,
demographics
please.
section, so here in Central Indiana, women are 52% of the population, and our population has grown 12% over the last decade. Middle-aged women, which are 35 to 64, are the largest group of Central Indiana's women population at 39%. And Marion County has a population of women and men that are uniquely younger than other counties. But I hope when people hear this demographic data that it reminds them that women and girls are not a fringe or special interest group. We are half, in some places,
exactly.
more than half of the population.
Yes.
So a community that doesn't work for us is not working, full stop. And I need people to think about it like that.
That's a very good point. Very good point.
And when it comes to youth and girls specifically, the problems and the challenges that girls are facing don't stop when they're 18. They carry over into adulthood. And I know we've had many conversations. It's like the chicken and the egg, for lack of better words. Girls are experiencing this, and then they become women who are experiencing this, and those women are raising girls, and it's a cycle.
It is. Yeah.
And it's continuing to create additional challenges on top of additional challenges. And so if we don't provide prevention and support for girls and women, the problems become and remain challenges as they grow into womanhood.
Yep.
I thank you so much for saying that the problems as girls can remain in womanhood, because I'm going to shift gears a little bit and I want to talk about mental health. Because for as long as we can remember, it was absolutely taboo to talk about mental health. But then during COVID, when we were all isolated from one another, we started to see and hear stories about the toll that the pandemic was taking on our mental health. And it's almost as if overnight, letting others know that you aren't okay is becoming okay for you to do. And so mental health is something that both of your reports have really called out. And so I would love for you to share some of those insights on the current state of mental health for girls and women, and those synergies again that you're seeing.
Yeah. So again, for girls, 47% of 7th through 12th graders reported being depressed. It's nearly half of our middle school girls. Girls are in a state of crisis. Girls are not okay. 1 in 4 seriously contemplated suicide. So 1 in 4 girls seriously are contemplating suicide. And then again, our families don't have the support that they need. And oftentimes the support that they are receiving are the teachers in their classrooms. And we all know that teachers have already a lot on their plate. And so where there are resources, living in Marion County, we do have access to quite a few resources here. But sometimes there's a lack of linkage. So families don't know how to gain access to those resources, or they fall in the cracks somewhere in that process, right? And then we look at rural communities across the state, and there aren't as many resources in those cases. And so girls are not getting the support and access that they need. Denise, you talked about hospitalizations. So girls are hospitalized at 3 times the rate of boys in the state of Indiana. The mental health crisis, being in the youth serving agent space for the last decade, is not a surprise. We've all seen this and how our young people are showing up day to day. And then we think about academics and how it impacts them, and how can they even begin to learn when they're in this crisis mode. Hospitalizations did surprise me. But what we have found through the research is that many of the hospitalizations, a national trend is showing us, many girls are hospitalized because of mental health crises. And so then we're using our ERs and we're using our hospitalizations as treatment centers. That becomes concerning because we also know that hospitals are short-staffed.
Yep.
And so it's just a cycle.
It's that hamster on the wheel, because actually if you're using hospitalizations as a mechanism for managing a mental health crisis, that once again reflects the fact we don't have the proper resources for our adults and for, caregivers to direct that girl to the right resource to get the help that she needs.
And oftentimes it's gone too far, and you haven't been able to get the supports when you begin to feel hopelessness, when you
Right.
begin
At the
to
beginning.
have,
At
yes.
the beginning.
And their mothers are struggling too.
Yes,
So
exactly.
the adult
Yes,
is
yes,
struggling
yes.
and still struggling with stigma
Yes.
and doesn't have the money to access mental health care or can't find trauma-informed and culturally competent care. Then, so one of the things that we heard, actually this started with women. So last year as we were doing community listening, we asked women what were the priority issues that Women's Fund should be focusing on. Health was the number one, and underneath health, it was reproductive health and mental health. And women told us they were particularly concerned, not just with their own mental health, but the mental health of girls. And the data, again, reveals why. So nearly 30% of women in central Indiana reported experiencing depression. Frequent mental distress affected 20% of women. And the highest rates were among women 18 to 34. And remember, we just heard that those women were also likely to live in poverty. And we're also hearing that, those 18-year-olds struggle through COVID. So those 18-year-olds are the girls that Mackenzie is talking about that are in your report that are now aging up into women. Women in central Indiana consistently have higher rates of emergency interventions for mental health crises compared to men. So the same picture that you've drawn for girls just
It's a mirror
moves with
image.
them.
Yeah.
And then if their moms are struggling, then they can't get the support. And many of the great organizations that we know that work with girls and young people simply don't have the resources in order to provide that, because I've talked to some of them and they're like, if young girls can't get individual attention through their families, then maybe we can provide it. But then you need those trauma-informed, culturally competent healthcare providers to go to different places, like to be engaged in that. And there simply aren't enough, in part because women and girls specific issues only get 1.8% of all U.S. philanthropic giving, and women and girl of color issues only get 0.5%.
So every time you share that number with me, it makes me itch. I mean,
Good.
that is ridiculous.
Yes.
That, to be 50% of the population and only represent 1.8% of funding and then 0.5 for women of color, that is outrageous. And we should be ashamed. Those that are giving money should be ashamed that they're not demanding more from organizations that are requesting money for programs that impact women and girls. So I'm done with my rant because I'm going to move on to another topic, but I just think it's just absolutely appalling. Yet, you all have something, you've said something before when we've talked about when women thrive, communities, the families thrive.
Communities thrive.
Yes, communities thrive. And so, but you only want to give us 1.8%. So you're putting a box around our ability to thrive. And yes, it does say a lot about all we're able to do within these circumstances that we're existing within, but it doesn't give you an excuse not to support it properly. I want to talk a bit about relationships, though, because that's another topic where we saw a lot of synergy in these two reports. And as a young person, those formative years when you start dating and you start exploring relationships that have deeper emotional connections, they can sometimes, unfortunately, turn violent. And Mackenzie, the Indiana Girl Report states that Indiana girls are experiencing sexual violence at 4.5 times the rate of boys. And that number is concerning for many reasons. And we've touched on it previously because, as we've said, and we keep saying, so go our girls, so go our women. They are reflections of one another. And so I want you both to talk about how these experiences are carried into adulthood, Mackenzie, because you've got a really great explanation of how you map out how that works on both sides of this conversation. So I'd really love to talk about those cause and effect factors that you've seen.
Yeah. Well, first, it should be noted that that's probably underreported. right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of sexual
Absolutely.
violence and violence that does go unreported. So that's really alarming. But it's already that high and it's probably underreported. When we, so we've done a couple of things to really help us begin to understand why on some of these data points. Like Tamara mentioned, the Women's Fund did some community listening sessions. Girl Co, we also did community listening sessions, and mental health, healthy relationships rose to the top of what girls and families want for their girls, right? We also did some co-creation with girls to say, like, what is it that's important to you, and how can we reach your needs? We then also hired a research firm to help us begin to understand why. And here's what we found. We ultimately believe that mental health, bullying, and sexual violence are interdependent. And we should be talking about it because, to quote one of our girls who participated in the community listening sessions, it happens a lot more than you think. And so that's alarming. 17% of our high school girls experienced sexual dating violence in the last year. Again, 1 or 2 girls per classroom. Instances of interpersonal aggression correlates across the life cycle. So bullying and sexual violence have ties to having experienced and or observed violence in childhood. And so those who are bullied are more likely to become victims of sexual violence. And those who bully are more likely to become perpetrators of sexual violence. And we know that bullying and sexual violence from both sides, if you're the bully or the victim of the bullying, or if you are a victim of sexual violence and or the perpetrator of sexual violence, that it has an impact on your mental health regardless. And so it becomes a cycle. Again, it's a cycle.
Yep.
But they are interdependent. And so we have to begin to solve for some of these challenges.
We truly do. We're going to talk about in a minute, because I do want us to leave time to cover that. So, Tammy, you want to share some?
Yes, because the reason it's important, there was a 10-year study of dating violence, and they found that victims have an increased likelihood of experiencing intimate partner violence later in life. So it shouldn't surprise you after listening to what Mackenzie just said, that in Indiana, 42.5% of women experience violence, sexual violence, or stalking from an intimate partner in their lifetime. And then due to systemic racism and policies and societal structures, Black women experience domestic violence at higher rates than their white counterparts. So 45% of domestic violence victims were Black as of 2020.
So that's alarming. That's very alarming. What you shared, Mackenzie, is alarming, but it also is a gaze into the looking glass, with everything that Tammy has talked about. So we have to do better. We have got to do better. And in the last couple of minutes that we have, I really want us to spend some time talking about that, because with all these narratives, they're grim. And there's been a lot of surveys out, including one completed by the Institute for Policy and Research, which gave Indiana the grade of D concerning women's health and our well-being, a D. And that's deplorable. It truly is. And so, other research has also ranked Indiana in the top 10 worst states for women in our nation. That's not something we should be proud of at all. And so I would like for the two of you all to talk just a little bit about immediate actions that our listeners can take to shift this narrative. I also want you to talk a bit about what organizations and even policymakers who are listening can do with respect to these systemic changes that we need to put in place immediately to change this narrative.
I would say two things. And one, please read these reports.
Right.
Read the
Yes,
Indiana
reading.
Girl report.
Right,
Read the State
reading.
of Women in Central Indiana report. Because like we both said, if we can't name it, if you don't know the state of women and girls in this state, then you can't do anything about it. So I encourage our legislators, decision makers, everyone who works with women and girls to please read these reports, because again, if you are not considering women and girls, you are not considering half of the population. What you are doing is not working. I would also say, call upon listeners to vote in every election,
Yes.
not just the one that's coming up
Right.
in 30 days. Vote in every election, because many of these issues are policy issues. And so you want to make sure that your voice is being heard and that you have legislators who are thinking about women and girls and making the best decisions locally and statewide.
Thank you. That's such a good, so important, so important.
We can't do this alone. We can sit in this room and have these conversations every day.
Right.
But it does take a collective. It takes everyone acting and thinking about how this decision impacts girls and women across our state. And, I think having these conversations helps further that. Tamara and I are guest editing the October Indie Maven newsletter, and we're excited to bring that to more viewers across Central Indiana. But it is important that we start in our own communities, in our own houses. And so if you are a parent to a young girl, if you have that honor, if you are serving in any role, an aunt, a grandma, a mentor, it's important that we empathetically listen to our young people and our young girls. Girlhood is so much different than the way we experienced it.
Absolutely.
Whatever many years ago that was, right? Girls are experiencing vastly different challenges, and we need to empathetically listen and validate the way she is feeling and the way she is experiencing things in life today. And then if you are an educator or a youth development professional, it is important to create girls' safe spaces for girls. We do know that there's research that backs that to say that girls do feel safe in environments that are built for girls. We also know that girls need spaces to talk about their feelings. And so youth development providers bringing in mental health counselors to give access to girls to have those conversations. For educators, partnering with youth serving organizations to provide those programs in the school day, right? And then policymakers have a huge opportunity here. We can do everything possible in our communities for girls to thrive, but until we also tackle systemic challenges that are affecting girls and women across our state, we're really putting Band-Aids on it, right? And so you, lawmakers, policymakers, decision makers, funders have an opportunity to support access to mental health services, making sure we're funding those, making sure we're calling that out, and making sure that it's prioritized in budgets in the state, ensuring that prevention programs, and we continue to support programs that address interpersonal aggression, but also listening to the girls and women. I think that's first and foremost the most important call to action that we can take, regardless of who you are. But I guarantee you, everybody has a girl and a woman in their life that they care about.
Oh, absolutely.
And I would add, support women and girls serving organizations,
Yes.
because 1.8% is deplorable. And these are the people who are on the ground working to change some of these things that we have talked about. So not just Women's Fund, but support Girl Coalition and support Inner Beauty and Deborah's Place and Coburn Place and Girl Scouts and all of those organizations, because they are doing this work. And if you agree with us that it needs to be done, I hope you will support it with your time, talent, and treasure.
Treasures, your treasures. You want that 1.8 to go up. You want that 0.5 to go up.
That's right.
So we just have, just a little time left, short time left. And so I just want to leave on a positive note, because I really would love to know what gives you all hope, because you're working in a very, very challenging space. And so there's a reason why you do this. And so what gives you hope about this time where we are?
Yeah. Girls are strong and girls are resilient. But I keep coming back to, wouldn't it be so great if girls didn't have to be resilient? If the systems were built around them to support them and uplift her and empower her. I had the opportunity to benefit from programs like this and have since spent many of my professional years working with
You're a
girls.
product. You're
Yes.
a product of a
Yeah.
powerful women's organization, a girls focused on girls.
Yeah. I remember sitting in a room in 6th grade, hearing what it meant to be strong, smart, and bold, and having women pour into me. I was a first-generation college student, and there was no way that I would have been able to sit in this room without the mentorship and support that women and girl-serving organizations did for me. We've talked to girls across the state, and they want to have these conversations, right? They're begging to be listened to. They want adults in their lives to listen and take action. And knowledge is power. As Tamara said, for the first time, we can holistically see the state of girls and women, and it's time to do something about it. And so if you take away nothing else from this conversation, that now is the time to act. And it takes all of us. We all have a piece in this puzzle, and there is a sense of urgency to do better for our girls and women. A D is not okay.
It's not. And that is what gives me hope. It's all of these women like Mackenzie. I spent this morning actually meeting with Paradise Bradford, who runs Pretty Passionate Hands, which she founded out of her own lived experience for teen moms. Because I know one of the high points of my job is that I get to meet all of these women like Paradise and Mackenzie, who have just this deep passion for women and girls and her doing something about it. And there are so many people working to do great things for women and girls in this community. And I know we can do it. I know girls and women are resilient, but we shouldn't have to be alone. We need everyone's support. But the will is there and the passion is there, and that gives me hope.
Well, I just want to thank the two of you all for sounding the alarm. I kept hearing Beyonce in my mind saying, ring the alarm, and I could see, we need to ring the alarm and not let off of the alarm, because this is very important, what you all have talked about. And there is a call to action here. We need people to read the report. We need people to listen to girls and women. We need people to talk to one another, and we need for people to do something. My motto or mantra sometimes is, you're either going to talk about it or you're going to be about it. Otherwise, you are just a bobblehead moving from side to side. And we can no longer afford Indiana to be bobbleheads when it comes to the state of women and girls who call Indiana and Central Indiana home. That time is gone. That ship has sailed. So thank you so much for joining us today and shedding the light on this very, very important topic. If you haven't already, make sure you go to girlcoalitionindiana.org to download the 2024 Indiana Girl Report so you can do your part in changing the narrative for future generations of girls. And don't forget to visit womensfund.org and you sign up for their newsletter so that you can be the first to read that report, their report about Central Indiana women when it's released. So thank you again for those of you who tuned into this episode of How They See Us. Don't forget to subscribe to our How They See Us
podcast series, which is available on all streaming platforms, and you can watch our YouTube channel as well. I would be remiss if I did not thank Kiara Santalent, who is our lovely account executive who's responsible for keeping us on task and on time and producing this episode and all episodes of How They See Us. And until next time, take care and talk soon.